Hey, this is Zach Marley with Low Brass U, and today we're going to go through my Mouthpiece collection. Before I talk about all these mouthpieces, I want to mention a few things. First, I'll be using timestamps so you can easily find mouthpieces that you might be interested in or might suit your needs well. Secondly, in the video description you'll find links for all of these mouthpieces where you can easily purchase them. Many of these links will be affiliated links, which means I'll get a kickback if you decide to purchase something, but there'll be no additional cost to you. Using these links greatly helps out the channel and I greatly appreciate it. Thirdly, I am a Denis Wick artist, which means that I really like their mouthpieces and you'll find a lot of them in my collection. This doesn't mean that they pay for my opinion or anything like that, but it's worth mentioning anyway. Lastly, it's important to note that mouthpieces don't always solve problems, and playing the mouthpiece from your favorite professional probably won't make you sound just like them. So mouthpieces can be helpful, but they're not the end-all be-all. Let's get into the video. In this video, I'm going to go in order of smallest to largest mouthpieces. So if you're interested in tuba mouthpieces, you can go ahead and skip ahead to that point in the video. These are all the small shank mouthpieces that I have. So these are small shank mouthpieces that fit in small bore tenor trombones, some medium bore tenor trombones, alto trombone, and even some small shank euphoniums. We'll start from the smallest on this side, the 12s, all the way to the 5s on this side. First, let's go through the 12s. This is a Denis Wick 12CS Classic Series, which is my main mouthpiece for playing commercial music and alto trombone. I occasionally use it for some jazz playing, but it's always in my case whenever I have a small bore tenor trombone with me. My next 12 is a 12C from Vincent Bach. This mouthpiece is often in my alto trombone, as my 12CS from Denis Wick is often in my case or in another instrument. They're very similar mouthpieces. I would say the biggest difference is the rim is a little bit different. My last 12 is a Conn 12C. I believe this mouthpiece came with my 6H and might even be the original mouthpiece that the instrument was shipped with in 1972. This mouthpiece has maybe seen a better day, and I don't use it much. My only 11 is a Griego 11 in the New York blank. I got this mouthpiece when I picked out a custom trombone at Edwards, and this was the mouthpiece that at that time suited my needs with that instrument the best. I since sold that instrument, but kept this mouthpiece and occasionally still use it. 9s are an odd size that you don't see from many mouthpiece manufacturers. I got this Denis Wick 9BS Classic Series to go with my Conn 6H, which I feel complements it pretty well. For 7s, we get to my standard mouthpiece choice for a small bore tenor, a Denis Wick Heritage 7CS. I feel like I can use this mouthpiece for pretty much anything, but it really shines for jazz playing and things along that line. I'll often play lead in a big band with it, improvise solos, things like that. I feel most at home on this mouthpiece. This is a Pickett 7, which actually isn't my mouthpiece. It's been in my collection probably for about a year since one of my friends left it, and I figured that instead of shipping it back, I'd use this time to plug his channel. So if you want to go follow Connor Eisenmenger on YouTube or Instagram, he's got a lot of great trombone content, and this is his mouthpiece, so he deserves a little bit of a shout out. Moving into the land of 6s, I've broken these into categories even more specific than that. First, we have 6 3/4 Cs. These are actually both the same mouthpiece from Vincent Bach, and I have 2 of them because it was really my main mouthpiece for a long time. And I would keep one with one instrument and one with another, but I even feel like they're not exactly the same, which happens from time to time with manufacturers. They were probably made different times, and maybe there's slight variance in the metal or something like that, or maybe it's all in my head, but it's still a great mouthpiece, the 6 3/4 C. I have 2 6.5s that are for small shank instruments. This is a Benge 6.5, and this is an unmarked 6.5. I think this came with an instrument, but I can't really figure out which instrument it came with at this point. These 2 mouthpieces are both 6s, which is really similar to a 6.5, and they're probably just 6.5s at the end of the day. This is a Heritage 6BS from Denis Wick, and this is the same mouthpiece but with the classic blank. You can see with these 2 mouthpieces they're very similar, and they have the same inner profile, but the outside's a little bit different, even though they actually have a similar amount of weight to them. I feel like they sound a little bit different with the 6BS that's Heritage, maybe a little bit brighter, which is a good thing or a bad thing depending on what I'm trying to do. Now we get to the 5s. 5s is a little bit big for me on a small shank instrument, but sometimes can be very useful. I use a 5 when I'm maybe trying to pretend that my small bore is a large bore, and it does a pretty good job of kind of simulating that. So I have a Classic Series 5BS from Denis Wick, which is the same mouthpiece that I play in my large tenor, but the small shank version. And then I have the same mouthpiece with the Heritage blank. Again, I feel like the Heritage is a little bit brighter. I'm not sure the exact wording from Denis Wick on the different blanks, but that kind of always seems to ring true for me. And then I have a 5GS from Vincent Bach. And the S doesn't actually stand for a small shank, it's a shallower cup, which I have the exact same mouthpiece for a large shank as well. And there's no way to tell them apart other than looking at the shank or trying them in an instrument. So these are all my small shank mouthpieces. Comment below if you have a favorite small shank mouthpiece that you use, or if one of these mouthpieces is something that you might consider trying. Next, I want to go through all of my large shank mouthpieces. These are the mouthpieces I might use on a large bore tenor, a bass trombone, or a euphonium. Some of them there's some overlap, but for the most part they kind of have specific purposes to me. My smallest large shank mouthpiece is a 6BL Heavytop from Denis Wick. This was actually my first large tenor mouthpiece. I got this mouthpiece because everyone in my high school played the same mouthpiece. Although they actually all played 5BLs, I just got confused. This is still a great mouthpiece, and I still use it for various things when I want something a little bit smaller than my traditional 5 size. Next, I'll go through the 5s. For me, a 5 is a perfect size for a large tenor, and these 4 mouthpieces I use on large tenor pretty much exclusively, but you could consider using them for euphonium as well. My primary large tenor mouthpiece is a Denis Wick Classic Series 5BL. I have the same mouthpiece in a small shank so I can compare instruments that way, but I use this 99.9% of my playing on large tenor. My next 5 size mouthpiece is a Laskey 57MD. This mouthpiece was my primary large tenor mouthpiece for a long time and still has a special place in my heart. I always like the bright sound I can get from it, but ultimately I went with the Denis Wick for a little bit more security in the low range. My next 5 is a Griego 5 with the Nouveau blank. I purchased this mouthpiece when I purchased this instrument and went up to the Edwards factory and had it paired with it. It worked great for a long time, but ultimately I went with something else. Lastly, I have another Vincent Bach 5GS. This is the large shank 5GS. Again, you can't tell them apart other than looking at the shank size or trying them in an instrument. Next, I'll go through the euphonium mouthpieces that I've played. These mouthpieces could also be used on tenor trombone and maybe even some of them on bass trombone. We'll go from smallest to largest, and this first one is a Perantucci 5C. I had to look at it. I never actually played this mouthpiece, but I bought it for really cheap off of someone, and I thought, why not give it a shot? Next is a Schilke 51D. This is one of the most common euphonium mouthpieces, and I feel like every euphonium player should at least have one to try some things with. I played it for a while, but ultimately wanted something a little bit bigger and went with a Denis Wick instead. My main euphonium mouthpiece these days is a Denis Wick 3AL in the Classic series. This mouthpiece might be a little bit too big for some, but it works really well for me and helps me attain the really rich euphonium sound that I'm looking for. You might choose to play a 4 or even a 5 to try something smaller. You'll find professionals that play all of these sizes, and you really have to figure out what's best for you. Again, it's really important to realize that mouthpieces are very, very personal, and it really has to come down to the player and not just this is the best mouthpiece for everyone on every single instrument and every single use case. Next, I'll go through the bass trombone mouthpieces. Bass trombone mouthpieces use the same size shank as large tenor and large shank euphonium, but these mouthpieces are enough larger that I feel like they should be considered bass mouthpieces and not really large tenor or euphonium mouthpieces. First, I have a no-name mouthpiece which came with an instrument, and I couldn't even tell you what instrument it came with because someone else gave this to me. I've used it a few times, and I think what you might actually find out is that sometimes no-name mouthpieces actually do play pretty well. These 2 mouthpieces are both by Denis Wick and are my main bass trombone mouthpieces. I probably prefer the 0AL Heritage over the 1AL Classic series, but I use both for different things in different situations. The 0 is my main mouthpiece for playing in big bands and things like that, whilst the 1 I feel like compacts the sound a little bit and makes me fit in with large tenors a little bit better in more symphonic situations. Both mouthpieces are great, and I would even encourage people to try mouthpieces that are smaller than these. I have a lot of friends who play 2s from Denis Wick, and they really like that size. For some reason, I kind of gravitate to the bigger mouthpieces though. My last and largest mouthpiece for bass trombone is a 00AL from Denis Wick. This mouthpiece is really more suited for contrabass trombone, but occasionally I'll stick it into a bass trombone to have some fun. Really, this is a mouthpiece that I like using for contra whenever I'm testing out an instrument, but unfortunately I don't actually own a contrabass trombone. Now we get to the tuba mouthpieces. On my F tuba, I play two different mouthpieces primarily. The first is a Bruno Tilz M9 that's stamped Hirschberner. I suspect that it came with a Hirschberner instrument at some point in time, but this is the mouthpiece that came with my F tuba when I bought it used. My main mouthpiece, however, is a Denis Wick Classic Series 2L. This mouthpiece really helps with my tuba specifically because it's a little bit on the smaller side, but since this mouthpiece most would consider more like a C or a B flat tuba mouthpiece, that bigger size really helps kind of settle some things in the low range for me. I really like this mouthpiece and it really has helped me figure out some things on my F tuba. Now we get to the big tuba mouthpieces. These three mouthpieces are tubas that I might use in a C tuba or a B flat tuba, but could easily be used for an E flat or F as well, depending on the situation. First is my Schilke 67. This mouthpiece for me probably holds the record for being my longest standing mouthpiece that was in regular use. I used it from middle school all the way into grad school. It was a great mouthpiece for a long time for me, but ultimately, again, I did go with the Denis Wick. My two primary mouthpieces that I use on C tuba are the 1XL and the 2XL from Denis Wick. In this instrument, I generally tend to prefer the 1XL unless I'm doing something that maybe I need a little bit more agility and I don't need quite the cannon-like sound that sometimes the 1XL can bring. For orchestral excerpts, things like that, I almost always play the 1XL. The 2XL I often use for smaller instruments and B-flat tubas to give a little bit more clarity and things like that. It's a great mouthpiece and I probably would recommend this 2XL over the 1XL for most students. Again, mouthpieces are so personal, it's impossible for me to tell you what the right mouthpiece is for you. These are all just some of the mouthpieces I like to try. If you liked this video or found it helpful, please like, subscribe, and click the bell. For more help, visit lowbrassu.com for a video guide on this etude as well as many other educational resources.